So there I was, Ambassador Jake Martinez, sitting in what can only be described as the universe's most pretentious conference room. Picture this, a massive crystalline dome floating in space, filled with beings that looked like they'd been designed by a committee of alien fashion designers having a particularly bad day. And me? Just a guy from Cleveland who somehow talked his way into representing the entire human race. Yeah? That's not terrifying at all. The Galactic Council had summoned Earth's representative for what they called an urgent diplomatic consultation. In my experience, when someone uses the word urgent in politics, you're about to get screwed with a smile and a handshake. Today was no exception. Chancellor Vexthull, who looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a lawyer, which is probably redundant, cleared his throat with a sound like grinding gears. Ambassador Martinez, he began, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining taxes to toddlers. We have reached a consensus regarding your species. Oh, have you now? I leaned back in my chair, which was apparently designed for beings with 3 spines and a tail. Do tell. After extensive deliberation, Vexthull continued, gesturing dramatically with his 4 arms, the Council has determined that humanity poses a significant threat to galactic stability. Your species displays alarming levels of aggression, unpredictability, and what we can only describe as suicidal tendencies. You eat plants that cause you pain for entertainment, chimed in Councillor Wobblex, a blob-like creature that somehow managed to look judgmental despite having no discernible facial features. You willingly launch yourselves into space in metal tubes powered by controlled explosions. You created something called extreme sports where the entire point is to nearly die while having fun. Okay, when you put it like that, I started. But Vexthull held up a hand. Well, one of his hands. The other 3 were probably taking notes on how to be more insufferable. Therefore, the Chancellor announced with the gravity of someone delivering a death sentence, the Council has decided to offer humanity protective custody. We will relocate your species to a designated preservation world, where you can live safely under our guidance, away from the dangers you seem so determined to create for yourselves. The room fell silent, except for the gentle humming of the station's life support systems. I could feel dozens of alien eyes, compound eyes, and what might have been sensory organs staring at me, waiting for my response. I smiled. Not the diplomatic smile they'd been getting for the past 6 months, but the kind of smile that made my high school principal nervous. That's very generous of you, I said, my voice perfectly pleasant. And if we decline this incredibly thoughtful offer? Vexthull's mandibles clicked in what I was learning to recognize as alien smugness. Oh, Ambassador Martinez, I don't think you understand. This isn't really a request. Now I've been doing this diplomatic dance for 6 months, and I've learned that when someone tells you something isn't a request, that's usually your cue to start paying attention to the exits. But I'm nothing if not professional, so I decided to give the whole reasonable discussion thing one more shot. Look, I said, pulling up my holographic presentation with all the enthusiasm of a teacher showing slides to kindergartners. I think there might be some misunderstanding about humanity's capabilities here. Let me walk you through our track record. The first image flickered to life, Earth, looking appropriately dramatic with its swirling blue oceans and white clouds. This is our planet. In the last 100,000 years, we've survived ice ages that would have turned most species into popsicles, volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun, and asteroid impacts that made your average planetary bombardment look like a light drizzle. Councillor Bleeptalk, who resembled a jellyfish having an identity crisis, rippled dismissively. Environmental challenges are hardly noteworthy, Ambassador. Most species face similar obstacles. Right, but here's the fun part, I continued, advancing to the next slide. We didn't just survive these things, we thrived. We turned ice ages into migration opportunities, built cities on fault lines for the scenic views, and when we ran out of natural disasters to overcome, we invented our own. The hologram now showed images of humans climbing mountains, diving into oceans, and yes, launching themselves into space in metal tubes. We created written language, mathematics, art, and something called the Internet, which is essentially a global network that allows any human to access the sum total of our species' knowledge instantly. We use it primarily for pictures of cats and arguments about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. The Council exchanged what I was beginning to recognize as their version of concerned glances. Chancellor Vexthull leaned forward, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic display. Ambassador, while these achievements are quaint, they don't address the fundamental issue. Your species is inherently violent. You've fought over 14,000 recorded wars in your brief history. Ah yes, the violence problem. I couldn't help but grin. Funny thing about that statistic. You know what it tells me? It tells me that in 14,000 conflicts, we somehow managed not to wipe ourselves out. Most species get maybe 1 or 2 shots at global annihilation before they figure out diplomacy or extinction. We've had 14,000 practice rounds, and we're still here, still growing, still learning. Wobblex made a sound like a deflating balloon. Your pride in your own brutality is exactly what concerns us, Ambassador. Civilized species resolve conflicts through mediation, economic pressure, and social restructuring. They don't celebrate their capacity for destruction. Civilized species, I repeated, savoring the words like fine wine. Tell me, Counselor Wobblex, how exactly did your species achieve this remarkable state of civilization? I'm genuinely curious about your methods. The silence that followed was the kind of quiet that happens right before someone says something they really shouldn't. Chancellor Vexthal straightened in his chair, clearly pleased to have the opportunity to lecture the primitive human about proper galactic etiquette. An excellent question, Ambassador. You see, true civilization is achieved through what we call gentle expansion. When we encounter a developing species, we offer them the opportunity to join our galactic community under our guidance. And if they decline, I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew where this was going. Well, Vexthal's mandibles clicked in what I was starting to realize wasn't smugness but nervous energy. Most species come to understand the benefits of our protection once they see the alternatives. Economic isolation, resource limitations, technological stagnation. It's remarkable how quickly primitive cultures embrace civilization when faced with the reality of their situation. Counselor Bleeptalk bobbed approvingly. We have a 99.7% success rate in bringing developing worlds into the galactic fold. The process is entirely peaceful. We simply help them understand that their traditional ways of life are no longer sustainable in a connected galaxy. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. And that 0.3% that didn't embrace your generous offer. Tragic cases, Wobblex deflated slightly. Species too primitive to understand the benefits of advancement. They chose isolation over progress, and well, the blob creature made a sound like a shrug. Isolated worlds have so many natural dangers. Asteroid strikes, solar flares, ecological collapse. Without proper galactic protection, these things become inevitable. Inevitable, I repeated slowly. How remarkably convenient. The Zephyrians were particularly stubborn. Vexthal continued, apparently missing my tone entirely. Beautiful culture, actually. Incredible artists, fascinating philosophy about individual freedom, but they simply couldn't adapt to the requirements of civilized society. Their insistence on maintaining their unique cultural identity made integration impossible. Where are they now? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. Oh, they're perfectly safe, Bleeptalk assured me. We relocated them to a lovely preservation facility on Kepler 442c. Wonderful climate, beautiful scenery. They have everything they need to maintain their traditional lifestyle in a controlled environment. A zoo, I said flatly. A cultural preservation center. Vexthal corrected with the patience of someone explaining obvious facts to a slow child. They're much happier there, really. No more worrying about galactic politics or technological advancement. They can focus entirely on their art and philosophy without any of the pressures of modern civilization. And the Corvallians? I asked, remembering another name from the briefing files that had suddenly gone silent about 50 years ago. The council members exchanged glances. The Corvallians were unique, Wobblex said carefully. They had this peculiar notion that they could negotiate as equals with established galactic powers. Very aggressive in their diplomacy. They actually had the audacity to demand representation in council decisions that affected their sector. Shocking, I murmured. Indeed. We tried to help them understand the natural order of things, but they were quite insistent on maintaining their independence. Unfortunately, their home world experienced a rather severe ecological crisis shortly after they rejected our assistance. Solar radiation, I believe. Completely natural, of course, but without proper galactic-level environmental protection systems. Vexthal's voice took on a tone of deep regret that somehow managed to sound about as sincere as a used car salesman explaining why the warranty just expired. We offered to help with evacuation and resettlement, naturally. But by then, well, there simply wasn't time to save more than a few thousand individuals. They're quite comfortable in their new home, though. Lovely little moon in the Vega system. The pieces were falling into place with the subtlety of a sledgehammer to the face. I looked around the chamber at these civilized beings, these paragons of galactic society, and felt something shift inside me. Something that had been held carefully in check for 6 months of diplomatic niceties and polite conversations. You know what? I was done. 6 months of sitting in uncomfortable chairs, eating food that tasted like cardboard soaked in disappointment, and pretending that these sanctimonious space bullies were anything other than the galactic equivalent of a homeowners association with delusions of grandeur. Time to let them meet the real Jake Martinez. I stood up slowly, and something about the way I moved must have registered with them because the chamber got very, very quiet. "Oh, you think we're monsters," I said, and my voice had dropped to the tone I usually reserve for telemarketers and people who don't use turn signals. "You think humanity is too dangerous, too violent, too primitive to be trusted with our own planet." I started walking around the chamber, and alien eyes tracked me like I was a predator who'd just entered their territory. Which, considering what I was about to tell them, wasn't far from the truth. "Let me tell you about monsters, Chancellor. Let me tell you about a species so terrifying that we had to invent the concept of restraint just to keep from accidentally conquering the universe before breakfast." Vexed Hull's mandibles twitched. "Ambassador, I hardly think inflammatory rhetoric will help your case." "Inflammatory?" I laughed, and it wasn't the polite diplomatic chuckle they'd been hearing for months. This was the laugh of someone who'd just realized they'd been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. "Oh, Chancellor, I haven't even started being inflammatory. I've been being nice. Humanity has been being nice." I gestured to the holographic display, which was now showing images of Earth's history. "You want to know what monsters look like? We're a species that looked at the food chain and said challenge accepted. We took apex predators and turned them into pets. We have something called the honey badger, which is basically nature's way of saying what if we made something that just doesn't care about dying, and we think they're cute." Counselor Bleeptalk rippled nervously. "Ambassador, your species' relationship with your planet's fauna is not the issue at hand, isn't it?" I turned to face the blob directly. "Because here's what you don't understand about humans, Counselor. We don't just survive hostile environments, we make them our playgrounds. We climb mountains because they're there. We dive to the bottom of oceans for fun. We strap ourselves to rockets and shoot ourselves into the void because Tuesday was boring." The chamber was dead silent now. I had their attention in a way that 6 months of carefully prepared presentations never had. "You know what we do when we encounter something that can kill us," I continued, warming to my theme. "We figure out how to eat it, ride it, or make friends with it. Usually all three. You mentioned our wars, Chancellor. You know what those taught us? They taught us that the most dangerous thing in our universe isn't some cosmic horror or galactic tyrant. It's another human who's having a bad day." I pulled up another image, a simple graph showing human population growth. "You see this line? This is us after every single extinction level event our planet threw at us. Ice Age, line goes up. Volcanic winter, line goes up. Plague that kills half the population, line goes up steeper, because we got bored with dying and decided to invent medicine instead." Vexed Hull was leaning back in his chair now, and I could see something that might have been concern in his compound eyes. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ambassador?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Chancellor. I'm explaining. See, you've made a fundamental error in your assessment of humanity. You think we're monsters because we fight, because we're aggressive, because we don't know when to quit. But that's not what makes us monsters." I stopped walking and faced the entire council, letting my diplomatic mask drop completely for the first time since I'd arrived in this floating monument to bureaucratic arrogance. "What makes us monsters is that everything I just described. That's us being civilized. That's us with thousands of years of philosophy, art, literature, and ethical development telling us to be better than our instincts. That's us trying really, really hard to play nice with others." The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, Wobblex managed to produce a sound that might have been a question. "And if humanity stops trying to be civilized?" I smiled, and this time it wasn't diplomatic, wasn't sarcastic, wasn't even particularly human. It was the smile of a species that had looked at the universe and decided it wasn't scary enough. "Well, Counselor, that's when you'd find out why we're the only species in known galactic history to look at our own mortality and invent something called hold my beer and watch this." The council was starting to look like they were regretting this whole conversation, but I was just getting warmed up. 6 months of pent-up frustration with their condescending attitudes was about to get a proper outlet. "You want to know what real monsters look like?" I asked, pulling up a new series of images. "Let me introduce you to humanity's greatest hits. This is a human named Ernest Shackleton. When his ship got crushed by ice in Antarctica, did he give up and die like a sensible species would? No, he walked across one of the most hostile environments on our planet, sailed 800 miles in a lifeboat through some of the roughest seas on Earth, then climbed over a mountain range that had never been crossed, all to save his crew. And when he got back, He went on another expedition because apparently the first one wasn't exciting enough. Chancellor Vexthal's mandibles were now clicking in a rhythm that sounded distinctly nervous. Ambassador, individual acts of survival hardly demonstrate. Individual acts. I cut him off with a laugh that made several counselors physically recoil. Oh, Chancellor. You think that's individual? That's just Tuesday for us. Let me tell you about our hobbies. The display shifted to show images of humans doing what humans do best, being absolutely insane by any reasonable standard. We invented something called extreme sports because regular sports weren't dangerous enough. We jump out of perfectly good aircraft for fun. We strap ourselves to boards and ride avalanches down mountains. We built machines that go so fast they can kill us just from the acceleration, and then we race them against each other for entertainment. But that's not the scary part. I continued, beginning to pace again. The scary part is that we turned survival into an art form. We looked at every single thing that could kill us and said, what if we made this our friend instead? Fire? We put it in our homes for ambiance. Electricity? We wire our entire civilization with it. Nuclear fission? We built power plants and then got bored and used it to heat our bathwater. Counselor Bleep Talk was now a much smaller blob than when we'd started. Surely your species has some sense of self-preservation. Oh, we do. I grinned. It's just that our definition of preservation includes things like, let's see what happens if we mix these two chemicals that explicitly say do not mix on the warning labels. We have an entire scientific method based on the principle of I wonder what would happen if, followed by the most dangerous possible answer. I gestured to a new image, humans in space suits floating in the void. You mentioned our suicidal tendencies to launch ourselves into space in metal tubes. You know what we call those people? Astronauts. Heroes. We give them parades. And you know what they want to do after we parade them around for risking their lives in the infinite deadly vacuum of space? They want to go back. They want to go further. They want to plant flags on planets that are actively trying to kill them just by existing. The chamber was now so quiet I could hear the life support systems cycling, and I was pretty sure at least 3 counselors were seriously reconsidering their career choices. But here's the thing that should really keep you up at night, I said, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. Everything I just described, that's us at peace. That's us with no external threats, no existential dangers, no one trying to wipe us out or put us in zoos. That's us so bored with our own safety that we had to invent new ways to risk our lives just to feel alive. I stopped pacing and faced Chancellor Vexthal directly. You want to know our most terrifying trait? It's not our violence, or our aggression, or our refusal to quit. It's our creativity. When a human gets backed into a corner, we don't just fight back. We invent entirely new ways to fight back that no one has ever thought of before. The holographic display now showed a simple schematic: human technological development over time. The line wasn't just exponential, it was practically vertical in recent centuries. We went from hitting things with rocks to splitting atoms in less than 10,000 years. We figured out how to fly, how to communicate instantly across our entire planet, how to see the structure of reality itself, and then we got bored and invented the internet so we could share pictures of what we had for lunch. I could see Vexthal's compound eyes reflecting the display, and for the first time since I'd met him he looked genuinely uncertain. What are you saying, Ambassador? I'm saying, Chancellor, that you've been negotiating with the wrong species this entire time. I smiled, and this time it was the kind of smile that sharks would approve of. You think you've been talking to primitive humans who need your protection and guidance, but here's the thing you missed in all your careful observations and cultural assessments. I leaned forward, and my voice carried the weight of every human who'd ever looked at impossible odds and decided they were more like guidelines than actual limitations. We've been pretending to be primitive. We've been pretending to be harmless. We've been pretending to need your help. But the truth is, we've been watching you, learning about you, and preparing for exactly this conversation for the past 6 months. Did you really think we'd send our best diplomat to meet with a galactic council without doing our homework first? The silence that followed was the kind of quiet that happens when someone realizes they've been playing checkers while their opponent was playing 4D chess with pieces made of antimatter. I let that silence stretch until I could practically hear their collective panic setting in. Nothing quite like the sound of an entire galactic council realizing they'd catastrophically underestimated the species they'd just threatened with forced relocation. You see, I continued, settling back into my chair with the casual air of someone who'd just revealed they'd been holding all the aces the entire time. While you've been having your little debates about humanity's primitive nature, we've been doing what humans do best, preparing for the worst-case scenario, while hoping for the best. Chancellor Vexthal's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. What exactly have you been preparing for, Ambassador? Oh, the usual human things, I said with a shrug that somehow managed to be more terrifying than any threat. We've been mapping your trade routes, analyzing your military capabilities, studying your economic dependencies, and generally figuring out how your entire galactic civilization actually works. Fascinating stuff, really. Did you know that 73% of your food production relies on exactly 12 agricultural worlds, and that your entire communication network funnels through just 8 relay stations? I could see the exact moment when the implications hit them. Councillor Wobblex deflated to about half his original size, and several other council members were making sounds that their universal translators were having trouble processing, but which I was pretty sure translated to various forms of "oh no." But here's the beautiful part, I continued, warming to my theme. We didn't have to threaten anyone, attack anyone, or even raise our voices. We just did what humans always do when we encounter a new system. We figured out how it worked, and then we figured out how to work within it. Turns out, when you're a species that treats problem-solving like a competitive sport, galactic politics isn't really that complicated. I stood up again, but this time the movement was relaxed, confident. I was no longer the frustrated diplomat trying to reason with condescending aliens. I was humanity's true representative, and it was time for some real talk. So here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice taking on the tone of someone explaining obvious facts to people who should have figured them out already. You're going to withdraw your generous offer of protective custody. You're going to update humanity's status in your galactic database from primitive species requiring guidance to something more accurate. I'm thinking valued partners with a proven track record of turning impossible situations into learning experiences. And if we refuse, Vextel asked, though his mandibles were clicking so fast it sounded like a machine gun made of anxiety. I smiled, the kind of smile that had probably made more than one human civilization's enemies reconsider their life choices. Well, Chancellor, that's when you get to find out what happens when a species that considers dangerous to be a synonym for interesting stops pretending to play by other people's rules. I gestured to the holographic display, which now showed a simple star map with Earth at the center. See, the thing about humans is that we're really good at making friends. And when I say friends, I mean the kind of friends who show up at 3 a.m. to help you move a body, no questions asked. We've got this funny habit of inspiring loyalty in other species, especially ones that have been on the receiving end of your gentle expansions policies. The map now showed dozens of systems highlighted in blue, poor problem species that had somehow managed to maintain their independence despite the Council's best efforts. Funny thing about all those ecological disasters and economic collapses that happened to worlds that refused your help. Turns out, when you actually investigate them instead of just accepting the official reports, they're a lot less natural than advertised. Councillor Bleep Talk made a sound like a balloon losing air. You can't prove anything, can't I? I chuckled. Bleep Talk, I represent a species that invented forensic science, because we got bored with not knowing who committed crimes. We figured out how to determine guilt or innocence from microscopic evidence, and then turned it into entertainment television. You really think we can't figure out the difference between a natural solar flare and an artificially induced one? The chamber was now filled with the kind of tension that usually preceded either total surrender or complete disaster. I was betting on surrender, but with humans you always prepare for disaster anyway. But here's the thing, I said, leaning forward and letting my voice carry the weight of every human who'd ever faced overwhelming odds and decided they were more like a suggestion than an actual problem. We don't want to be your enemies. We don't want to tear down your galactic civilization or turn your trade routes into shooting galleries. We just want you to understand one simple fact. I paused, looking each council member in whatever they used for eyes. This was us being nice. This was us playing by your rules, using your diplomatic protocols, and trying to work within your system. We've been the model of civilized behavior for 6 months, sitting in uncomfortable chairs, eating terrible food, and listening to you explain why we need your protection from ourselves. The silence was deafening. What you need to understand is that this is what humans look like when we're trying to be civilized, when we're trying to fit in, when we're trying to make friends and play nice with the galactic community. I stood up, and somehow the simple action seemed to fill the entire chamber with presence. You really don't want to find out what we look like when we stop trying. Chancellor Vextel's voice came out as barely more than a croak. What do you propose, Ambassador? I propose we start over, I said cheerfully, as if I hadn't just spent the last hour systematically demolishing their entire worldview. Hi, I'm Jake Martinez, representative of humanity. A species with a proven track record of turning impossible into Tuesday, an extinction-level threat into new hobby. We're looking forward to a long and mutually beneficial relationship with the Galactic Council, based on mutual respect and the understanding that humans consider challenge accepted to be our unofficial species motto. I extended my hand toward Vextel. Do we have an understanding, Chancellor? The Chancellor looked at my outstretched hand like it might explode, which, given what he'd just learned about humans, was probably not an unreasonable concern. After what felt like an eternity, he reached out with one of his forearms and shook my hand. I believe, he said carefully, that humanity's status in our records may indeed require some revision. Excellent. I grinned. I'm sure this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Oh, and Chancellor, you might want to send a message to those preservation facilities. Some of their residents might be interested in discussing new living arrangements. Something tells me they're going to have a lot more negotiating power now that they've got friends who think impossible odds sounds like fun. As I walked out of the chamber, I could hear the council members beginning what sounded like a very animated discussion behind me. But that was their problem now. I had a report to file, and for the first time in 6 months, it was going to be a fun one to write. After all, there's nothing quite like the satisfaction of a job well done, especially when that job involves reminding the universe that humans didn't claw their way to the top of their own food chain just to let someone else put them in a cage, even if it is a really nice cage with excellent climate control and all the amenities.